life, Mary had lived in the same little village. Most of that time it was just called Niniah, just a fishing village. A place where every day the men and the women, the men, like her brothers and her father, went out and tried their luck with their nets on the Sea of Galilee. And sometimes they came back with a few choice fish. Sometimes they came back with nothing. And once in a while, very rarely, they came back with their nets bursting full. And those were days when the whole village turned out to celebrate and rejoice together. Some days they didn't come back at all. The Sea of Galilee was infamous for the storms that could blow up out of nowhere. But that was life. That's how they lived. That's how they made it. And everyone tried their chances and had a chance of getting by at least. So life was okay. But then the king's men came in, and they built the tower, and they built the fish processing plant, and they changed the name of the place to Magdala and Niniah. And they changed everything about their lives too. And the pressure on the fishermen to produce ever more and more fish for less and less money was relentless. And they became desperate. And they would work all night and all day and often have barely one meal to share with their family to show for it. And the desperation to find bigger and bigger catches of fish meant that the man had to go farther and farther out into the dangerous waters. And more of them didn't come home. It was like the king's officials were squeezing the very life out of them. And there was no meaning left in anything. But what could one woman, what could Mary do about that? What could anyone do? Oh, she tried. She spoke up loudly and boldly against the king's policies. She even tried to organize the fishermen and get them to refuse to take their fish to the processing plant, even though they really had no choice. But it didn't work. They wouldn't listen to her. They called her mad. They accused her of being possessed by a demon. 6 demons, they said. They wouldn't listen to her. They cast her off. She became an outcast in her own town. And that was when she fell into despair. Her 7th demon. The worst one of all. But it was sometime around then that she began to hear word spreading throughout Galilee of someone who was trying to do something about it. A preacher from Nazareth. And it was even said that he had gathered a huge crowd of people, 4, maybe 5,000 men, not even mentioning the women and the children. And that he had allowed them to eat all of the bread and all of the fish that they wanted. People marveled at this. And they wondered where he could have gotten the fish. That was a good question, of course. But it wasn't really the point. Because Mary knew what it meant. Everyone understood that King Herod was busy siphoning all of the fish out of the Sea of Galilee for his own use. And what had this Jesus done but had poked the king in the eye with a stick? He couldn't have declared more clearly that the fish in the Sea of Galilee belonged to the people of Galilee. And he had done it publicly by giving them a meal they would never forget. Now, Mary fully expected that after doing something like that, the man would just disappear. Maybe go off and hide in the wilderness like the previous prophet, John the Baptist, had done, hiding out by the Jordan River. Never in a million years did she expect him to show up. Just a few days later, right in the center of Magdala. But there he was, in the village square, preaching to the fishermen. Either this man was very brave, or he was very stupid. Well, she only had to listen to him for a few minutes to decide that he certainly wasn't stupid. A few minutes later, she had decided that he was, in fact, the wisest man she had ever heard of. And shortly after that, she knew that she would follow him wherever he went for the rest of her life. No matter what people thought of her, and they would think terrible things of her. What was it that made her so willing to drop everything and follow him? It wasn't just about the fish. If he had just been another prophet complaining about the lack of justice and sharing the goods that God had given the people, she wouldn't have given up everything to follow him. But you see, this man, he had a way of making you see what no one else could see. Something bigger. He called it the kingdom of God. And it blew every other vision she'd ever heard of out of the water. See, when you thought of Herod's vision, you know, when Herod looked at the fish in the Sea of Galilee, when he looked at the grain on the hills of Galilee, all he saw was dollar signs. All he saw was the money he could make from it. That was it. That was his total vision. And it seemed puny in comparison to this idea of a kingdom that was so large that it could not even fit in this world. A kingdom that even the lowliest peasant could belong to, could be a key citizen in. A kingdom that might well begin with a feast of bread and fish in the wilderness, but that would end with the world made new, transformed into God's ideal vision. That was something worth living for. That was something worth dying for. So Mary gave it all up to follow him. When Jesus went to Magdala, he did not go lightly. He knew what it meant. He knew how dangerous it was. But I think he knew he had to go. Because if this kingdom of God that he was talking about meant anything, it had to mean something in the heart of Herod's operation. It had to mean something in Magdala. So whatever the risk, whatever the cost, he went there. That's why he went there. But I think it's also true, at least on some level, that he went there for the sake of the one that he would meet there. The one who would become so essential to his ministry and to the church that would follow. He went there for the sake of Mary Magdalene, just as he would go for my sake and for yours. Would you please take a few moments in silent reflection?